I'm Melina Morrison. I'm the CEO of the peak body for cooperatives in Australia, the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals. And I'm going to talk to you for about 10 to 15 minutes this morning, a brief overview of what cooperatives are, what they can do in relation to care services, and some favourite case studies that I have of people using this wonderful enterprise model. So without further ado, what I'll do now is flip into slide view, if I can manage the technicalities of it. And again, Suet, if this is not working, because I can't see you in the room, please tell me, but just text me. So to start with, I'd like to introduce a little bit more about what the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals was formed to do, and what sector we represent. So we're the peak body, as I said before, for member-owned businesses in Australia. We exist primarily to close the gap in information, education and awareness of the cooperative and mutual business model. We have members and we represent a much broader sector in every part of the Australian economy. And I've pulled together a few logos for you this morning so that you can see that hiding in plain sight in the South Australian economy, there's some wonderful cooperatives and mutuals that I'm sure that many of you are aware of. So here's some of them, and you can see that we are strong in the banking and financial sector, in motoring, in healthcare, in insurance, in agriculture, in retail, in personal insurance, and many other areas such as small business. And this is just an overview of a few of those. But most importantly, we're here to talk to you about what cooperatives do in disability, aged care and other social service sectors. I thought I might start by just sharing with you some facts about cooperatives that often aren't known. One thing we use to describe this sector is its lack of visibility as contrasts with its use in society. So we call this the ninja economy. It's hiding in plain sight. In Australia, there are more than 2,000 cooperatively owned organisations. When you add up all of the members of cooperatives and mutuals in Australia, there are 29 million memberships. And that sounds crazy because that's more than the population of Australia. But if you think about some of those large mutuals, those consumer-owned mutuals like motoring organisations like RAA, which is part of a national sector which has 8 million consumer owners, credit unions, building societies and mutual banks like Beyond Bank, like People's Choice Credit Union, they have nationally more than 4 million consumer owners. So this is a large sector. When you count in mutually owned organisations in the superannuation sector, like the profit to member industry super funds, you get really large numbers, and that's how we measure the total impact in the Australian economy, which is 8.3% of GDP, which makes this the largest, the second largest industry sector. Globally, there are 1.2 million members of cooperative and mutual organisations. And many of these organisations are right at the grassroots in society. If you think of the fair trade products that you pick up at the supermarket, many of those products are grown by people in cooperatives that they own and manage in many parts of the world. So for me, the most important difference between co-ops and mutuals and other organisational forms is their membership, their ownership and control by members. And that's what I'd like to talk a little bit about now. You've already seen that video. So in terms of bringing this enterprise model to light, my colleagues at the BCCM and our our wonderful colleagues from overseas, like such as Guy, have been working to educate policymakers, government officials, politicians, and the wider sector about the special benefits of member ownership and control. I've got a few quotes up on the screen now. We've been very active making submissions to important inquiries into human services and community services over the last few years, and this has meant that there's been a light shone on the cooperative and mutual business model as one of the ways that we can start to think about delivering services for people in society. I'm very proud of the role that we were able to play to help bring a very important innovation to light, and that is the employee-led mutual in South Australia that's come out of the South Australian government to deliver the early childhood, early intervention services. And that's something that both Gillian and I were involved with through much of the latter part of last year and this year through our consultancy to the NDIA, and when the announcement of the staff mutual, and I certainly hope there are some representatives from this wonderful new organisation with you today, when that was announced, there were not only grand statements from your state political representatives, but also from there's a lot of interest in the federal arena as well. So you can see that quote from Minister Tien. So cooperatives and mutuals, what are they? I've described their member ownership and control function. They are based around a core set of principles that defines their character as being driven, their social mission being driven by enterprise, by commercial business models, but very much about deriving all of the benefit, the surplus of that enterprise back to the members. The 7 principles that you can see in this slide are the principles of the International Cooperative Alliance, the peak body for cooperatives. And what's really important about these 7 principles is that in cooperative national law, which we have in Australia, they're actually embedded as part of the law. So those tests of cooperation, such as the members' economic participation and the democratic member control, are part of the enterprise model in law and in the Constitution. Without going into too much detail, the legal models for cooperatives and mutuals in Australia are quite diverse. So these are not only innovative, but they're also flexible legal models. Most mutuals are regulated and legislated under the Corporations Act, the Federal Act, as companies limited by guarantee, and sometimes companies limited by guarantee and shares. But many, in fact, the vast majority of cooperatives that we see are formed under a unified, a harmonised state and territory registration system called cooperative national law. So what is the most clear demonstration of the difference between some of the forms of business or enterprise currently delivering services in Australia? We like to think of these enterprise models as being on a spectrum. There are positives, and sometimes there can be risks or negatives to different enterprise models. And so it helps us to think about what is the primary motivation or the driver of a particular legal model in terms of what it may derive back to the beneficiaries of the business model. In this simple spectrum of enterprise models that I'm showing you now, we can see that there is actually something that sits between a purely profit maximising company model and a purely, or a traditional, if you like, not-for-profit business model. And that's what we're here to talk to you about today, and you'll be workshopping these ideas. And this is really this third way of owning and running organisations to benefit members through cooperative and mutual business models. We see that one of the benefits of this particular model is its deep engagement with the member, who can be both the consumer of the service and the caregiver of the service. Both can exist in a hybrid or multi-stakeholder cooperative, or as in the case of the South Australian example, the primary members are the caregivers, that they are the workers or the employees. Social care mutuals have had a long tradition in Australia. They have had quite a concentrated development period in other jurisdictions, and one of those countries that's been leading on social care development has been the United Kingdom. So for the last decade and a half, they've had a public service mutual agenda and a task force and some government stimulus. This table and these takeouts are taken from a 2010 report that looked at what had been some of the benefits and some of the learnings from developing these public service mutuals. In this case, in the case of the United Kingdom, primarily in employee-owned organisations that were spinning out or leaving government to deliver services that had previously been delivered within government. Very importantly, in terms of the way that workforce is stimulated in these organisations, we do see a clear uptick in both the employee engagement and the productivity and service improvement that we see in the organisation. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in a moment about a tour that we are planning in the United Kingdom to examine some of these organisations that have been running for a few years and have really seen that both the consumer and the employee are empowered in these models. It is, of course, very important that governments and commissioners, public servants and other organisations like NDIA that are engaged in commissioning or providing the budgets in some way for care services are very supportive. And it's not only in the policy setting, but in terms of peer leadership. And we're seeing a great example, a great innovation of this happening in South Australia through your new social care mutual. So finally, I've got 4 case studies of wonderful organisations that have been going for some of them for relatively short period of time, but are really seeing a deep engagement and an opportunity to be able to motivate service delivery in a new way in the communities in which they operate. And I've mixed together some case studies, and you'll hear more about them today, that have different membership and member ownership models, just to show you the kind of range and innovation that you can have in a cooperative model. So the first case study I'm going to talk about is the National Health Cooperative, which is primarily based in the ACT, but is now spreading across the country, and in fact has its first clinic opening in New South Wales a couple of months ago. This is a patient-owned, so the consumer-owned model for this cooperative, 40,000 patient owners, and this is growing. In fact, they will double that number of members, patient owners, when they take on the full suite of primary healthcare services for the Australian National University. We call this a consumer-owned cooperative. It formed out of a real grassroots community development initiative, local people getting together because they were trying to find a solution for an acute shortage of GPs and affordable bulk billed healthcare in Canberra. So they registered their cooperative in 2008, and by 2010 they were able to open their first clinic. They did this primarily with community investment. They did have a small amount, but an important amount of seed funding from the ACT government and federal government of around $150,000, and they were able to access low-cost tenancy in a building in West Belconnen. They've now grown to 11 clinics. They provide 12% of primary health care, and it's all bulk billed in the ACT, and they reinvest their surpluses back into the enterprise, into the business. Importantly, not only are they a not-for-profit, non-distributing cooperative, but they have charity status. The next case study I'd like to talk to you about is this cooperative life, and it's a wonderful example of putting employees, the workers, the caregivers in the driving seat in an enterprise. So they provide support services, non-residential, aged care and disability support services in people's homes. They began quite recently, as you can see, in 2013, largely by the workers, the support workers themselves, and a wonderful champion, a woman called Robin Kaczmarek, who started up the cooperative. And they rapidly grew their client base, people who were dissatisfied with the quality of services and the continuity of care that they were being given in their homes, but also they grew their workforce because people who do this work wanted vocationally rewarding, and to be able to deliver high quality, consistent services to their clients. Interestingly, they began as a non-profit or a non-distributing cooperative, and they have restructured now, so they're a distributing cooperative. And Guy will talk to you about this today, because the employees, who are the owners of the business, can benefit from sharing the dividend or the surplus, small as it is. And this is a highly motivating factor in their business, and has raised the productivity of the enterprise. Just two more now. Silk is a co-op of cooperatives formed to support a family governance model for disability housing. It's a registered NDIS service provider, and it exists to enable families to form their own independent, family-governed cooperative homes under the NDIS Specialist Disability Accommodation Service. They've had overwhelming demand and interest in their model, and I'm delighted that they've informed us that they're about to buy their first tranche of land on which they will build a disability housing residence, and this will be built in partnership with a cooperative housing organisation, a community housing provider, which you can also see on the screen, called Common Equity New South Wales. So again, a great example of cooperation amongst cooperatives. The Common Equity logos that you see below community housing cooperatives are based in New South Wales and Victoria. Victoria has the largest cooperative housing sector. In fact, Common Equity Housing Limited is the largest community housing provider of all community housing providers by housing stock. In this model, the members of the cooperative are other cooperatives, which are the tenant-managed housing residences and complexes. This model provides great choice for tenants in social housing and is suited to groups that find themselves marginalised from affordable housing. In particular, both of these organisations are innovating and adapting their model. They're wanting to move towards bringing in equity models of cooperative ownership to create some intergenerational flexibility and pathways for people into equity ownership, as well as the rental model. Finally, Nunda, as it is known, or the Nunda Community Enterprise Cooperative, is my last example today, a wonderful cooperative formed by people living with intellectual disability and mental health issues in order to provide themselves with sustainable, consistent work in the real economy. I'm not sure how many of you watched Q&A on Monday, but that was on the disability sector, and particularly on the rollout of NDIA. And the overwhelming message from the panel was that people living with disability want real work in the real economy. And the slogan, I should say, of this cooperative sums up the motivation and the mission of the business. So while other businesses employ people to mow parks or make coffee, they do those things, the gardening services, the maintenance services for local government, and they run a cafe in order to employ people. What is really impressive about this organisation is it's been going now for quite a while, and the retention of the workforce. So 80% of the original members have been are still employed today, and many of them are enjoying long service leave. So they've had that high quality, consistent work that they set out to achieve for themselves. That's all I'm going to say today. I can see that I'm going beyond my time. The Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals is here to help you find out more and explore what a cooperative model might be able to provide for a service provider who would like to find a method, a way, a structure of engaging with consumers and workers in a deeply engaging way, and potentially scale, come together as service providers in enterprise cooperatives, or form worker cooperatives or consumer cooperatives out of your model. We have some great resources on getmutual.coop. So .coop is the global domain for cooperatives. In fact, we have 4 deep Pathfinder case studies, they're called, of these kind of social care cooperatives I've been describing today. The study tour, if you're interested in joining us on this study tour, it's limited numbers, so please contact us as soon as possible. In fact, you can talk to Gillian about that today, and that can be found on the BCCM website, that brochure. We would love to have representatives from service providers come on this journey with us in September. We exist to bring you together with the sector itself. The best way to form new cooperatives or to explore cooperative and mutual development is in cooperation with other cooperatives. So our co-design model is to bring you together with the sector. I look forward to engaging with you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.